Welcome everyone to another episode of Follow the Light Music Review. My name is John De Laurentiis, and this is episode 13 in the series Revisiting the Classics. And today we're going to be looking at another great album that came out in Christian music in the 1980s. And this one is Greg X Volz, The River is Rising. So before we get into looking at this particular album, I would encourage you to please subscribe to the channel, comment below, give your thoughts about this album, and also ring the bell for notifications and like the video as well. All right, so let's get into it. Greg X Volz, The River is Rising. And this is one that came out on Myrrh Records in 1986. And it is the very first solo album that Greg X Volz had recorded. And of course, Greg X Volz, will talk about him and his history here. But before we get to that, I'll just give you a look at this. This is my original digipack. So I've had this from all the way back, probably bought it in the 1980s, when it first came out. So it's got a little bit of wear on it. Normally I take very good care of my digipacks, but this one has traveled with me from different moves and stuff and has gotten a little bit buffed up, which is why I like digipacks. I don't like digipacks as much as jewel cases. Jewel cases, they get scratched, they get cracked, you replace them. The book is kept inside. With digipacks, you got to be very careful because they can get looking like album covers where they can get worn out. So this one opens up. Very common digipack during the day. Has all the lyrics here, has the credits here, opens up and has the CD there. Okay. Okay, and the spine there. So that is the original, like I said, digipack. I don't know the availability of this, actually. I did not check. I guess you could look on Discogs for it, but I know this is probably out of print and in need of a reissue. It would be great for one of the record labels that I work for to look into this. I don't know. Things are sometimes held back because cost of licensing is very expensive. And Myrrh in particular is now under the ownership of Word Curb Records, and probably may cost a little bit to license it, but it would be great to see this reissued. All right, so let's talk about Greg X Volz before we get into that album specifically. So, of course, Greg X Volz, he's been involved in music since a young age. He was in a band originally called the Wombats in high school. And then in 1968, he formed a band called Gideon's Bible. However, they purposely spelled the Gideon part in a what we consider as an erroneous spelling, Gidian, purposely, because they didn't want to face any kind of lawsuits with the Gideon's Bible organization that puts those Bibles that you find in hotel rooms all across the country. So then in 1970, he accepted Christ into his life, and he went on to form a new band with drummer Dave Eden. And that band, of course, you've probably heard of, is called the E Band. And the E standing for Emmanuel. And no studio recordings of this band exist except for on the rock musical, which was a 2-album release called Because I Am, and that came out in 1973. And E-Band did have a couple of songs that would later on be recorded by Petra. So Dave Eden's The Coloring Song and Praise Ye the Lord, which was written by Greg X Volz, both would show up later on the Never Say Die album. And of course, The Coloring Song was the album that broke Petra big. And of course, very mellow song, not really representative of the rock sound of Petra, but that was the song that kind of broke open the doors for them in terms of their popularity. And that was the one, like I said, came from the E-Band and was written by Dave Eden. Now, when the E-Band had ended in 1975, Volz moved to Springfield, Missouri, and there he worked for a time with Jesus music icon Phil Keaggy. He performed also in the leading role in a rock stage musical called Ezekiel. Now, his 4-octave vocal abilities drew the attention of REO Speedwagon. Yes, REO Speedwagon, the mainstream rock band that, of course, went on to huge success from their earlier albums when later on when Kevin Cronin was in the band, and they came out with the High Infidelity album, which catapulted them into the stratosphere. But Greg X Volz was asked to become the lead singer of REO Speedwagon, but he declined it as a result of his faith. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. So then Bob Hartman, of course, of Petra, brought in Greg X Volz, and he sang on 2 of the songs on Petra's second album, Come and Join Us, the opening track, God Gave Rock and Roll to You, and Woman Don't You Know. And eventually, after that, Bob Hartman asked Greg X Volz to become full-time in the Petra band, and he became the lead vocalist officially on their next album, which was 1979's Wash Is Whiter Than. Now, of course, that album also featured lead vocals by Rob Frazier, who was there for that time. Now, that was a very kind of mellow album, very adult contemporary, not really indicative of the Petra rock sound that was there in the earlier albums and then would return on the later albums there. So it's kind of like that album that's in there. Not that it's not a good album, but it's definitely not a representative album of the musical style of Petra. So when they did get to their next album, Never Say Die, which came out in 1981, that's where Petra got back to their more harder rocking sound, despite the fact that the Coloring Song, a very mellow song, was kind of the song that was big off of that album. But that album had some definite rock classics, like Chameleon is on there, Angel of Light is on there, and then again, like I said, Praise Ye the Lord also is added on that album as well, which was an earlier E-Band song. And there's also Killing My Old Man, and that, if you don't know the history of that song, that was a song that was actually written, and there's an earlier version of it, I think, on YouTube. If I can locate it, I'll put it in the description below. But there is like an early version of Killing My Old Man with the band that was on that Petra album, Come and Join Us, which, of course, Come and Join Us was originally original band really wanted to call the album Killing My Old Man, but that was rejected by the record company. In fact, the song was rejected, so it didn't show up until much later on the Never Say Die album is when it came on there. So now, interestingly, Greg X Volz did record an album under the name Xavier, okay, which is his middle name. That's what the X stands for. He recorded that in 1982, and it was a self-released album with a press of only 1,000 copies, and it's super hard to find now. And it's a collection of romantic love songs that were written by guitarist and singer Eric Schwabacher, and a couple of tracks are on YouTube. If you come to me and Outside Looking In, so I can put those links down in the description as well. But that's kind of a hard thing to find just on vinyl. It is listed on Discogs. And then, of course, Greg would go on to record with Petra 3 more studio albums: More Power to Ya in 1982, Not of This World in 1983, and Beat the System in 1984. They're all highly regarded albums, along with the live album he also recorded with them, 1986, Captured in Time and Space. And then, of course, after that, Volz felt the strain and the effects of touring on his family life, and he told Petra that after that tour, he was going to be leaving the band. So this leads us up to the debut album, his solo album, which came out in 1986, called The River is Rising. And that's what we're going to be looking at in terms of the songs on here and the classic album that it is. Now, the main musicians on this album here are Carl Marsh on acoustic piano, synthesizers, and Fairlight keyboards and Fairlight drums. Jimmy Lee Sloas on bass. Jimmy Lee Sloas, if I'm pronouncing that right, hopefully I am, a session bass player who was also the lead vocalist for the Imperials from 1986 to 1989. and also was a member later on of the group Dogs of Peace, if you remember them. Kurt Henderson was on the guitars, and he's been a longtime friend of Greg X Volz, and he's a part of CPR, which is the classic Petra Resurrection, which features 4 former members of Petra along with Kurt Henderson. And they do have an album out. Back to the Rock 2, I think, is the one that came out for that. And then also Jonathan David Brown does cymbal overdubs. Of course, Jonathan David Brown, well-known producer, who co-produced this album with Greg. And though there are also some well-known guests on this album as well, and I'm going to mention who they are as we discuss the songs and where they appear. So there is no organic drummer on the album, but that does not detract the quality of the songs. Would it be great if there was a live drummer on there? It would have been, rather than Fairlight drums and cymbal overdubs and those kind of things. Probably maybe would have enhanced it, but it really does not detract away from the quality of these songs that are on this album here. So let's discuss the songs. Let's go over them here. So this album opens up with Barrier. Now this is a great opening track, has this nice intro with the percussion bouncing back and forth between the speakers, keyboards that build up to a great rocking riff. Has a really good, intro, how it builds up, and then it goes into this great rocking guitar riff. Greg singing his heart out here on this song, and it's a song about basically breaking the barrier of doubt. This song was written by Mike Schmidt, who writes or co-writes all but one song on this album. It features a great guitar solo in it and ends with this great bass riff before it comes to its end. So it's a really strong opening track on this album. This is followed up by Joyous Grave. This is another great up-tempo rocker, has a catchy guitar riff, good keyboard textures on it, chorus is very infectious, and the song speaks joyfully about God calling his people out of the grave from death to life. It features a nice keyboard solo, and here's one of the guests that's on here. The keyboard solo is by none other than Petra member John Lowry. And there's also a nice guitar solo on here that is kind of like a guitar solo fill that's in the middle of the song that expresses musically the song's exaltation of resurrection. And this one was co-written with Greg X Volz. This is followed by the song Living for the Bell. This opens kind of up with this funky bass line, rhythmic guitar line, builds up to an infectious chorus, creatively talks about just, about living for the daily grind. So it's another way of saying, living the daily grind. Instead of saying it that way, I'm living for the bell. And the lyrics say, because your heart's not in it when you're living for the bell, right? In other words, it's kind of another way of saying I'm just going through the motions of getting up, going to my job, can't wait for the bell to ring to leave, thinking about maybe, the image of school as well. People, students in this case, waiting for the bell, they can't wait to get out. That was what Alice Cooper wrote about, right? With schools out. That kind of same sentiment there. Midway through, it features this explosive guitar solo, and then it ends with this talk section over the instruments that matches a type of repetition that mirrors the song's message. This is followed up by Still Waters. Now, this is a song that starts with this really memorable keyboard intro, nice bass line, then it segues into this almost rollicking, jazz-like musical motif as Greg sings with passion again, the verse that leads into the chorus with great harmonies. One could imagine this song fitting on one of the Greg X Volz era Petra albums, wouldn't seem out of place there. It's a song written by Greg, the album's co-producer Jonathan David Brown, and Carl Marsh. So this is the only song of the album where Mike Schmidt is not involved in the writing. And this song went on to become a number 3 Christian radio hit. This is followed by All I Can Do. This one is a pulsating mid-pace rocker, has a nice drum tempo to it. It builds up to a nice harmonized chorus that says, all I can do is praise him. One may be reminded of Greg's praise song, Praise You the Lord, from the Never Say Die album here. And this one also features a nice melodic guitar solo. This is followed by Heaven is Within You. Another rhythmic rocker, nice guitar strumming, strong bass playing, more great harmonies in the chorus, nice keyboard flourishes that add to that song's soundscape here, and another great guitar solo on here. So these guitar solos here by Kirk Henderson. And I was thinking, Kurt Henderson, where do I know that name? Is this a Kurt Henderson that did a solo album? But then I went back into my vinyl record collection and I was realizing it wasn't Kirk Henderson. There was an artist by the name of Kyle Henderson that had put out a solo album, and that's what I was thinking. So not the same person I was thinking of. So if you're thinking of that Kyle Henderson, this is obviously not Kyle. This is Kurt Henderson, like I said, longtime friend of Greg X Volz. All right, and then we go on after that to the title track, The River's Rising. And this starts out with a keyboard and piano intro that's kind of symphonic in nature before the beautiful guitar melody kicks in with some nice drum accents and nice bass backbone here. The song ventures into another almost type of soulful, jazzy direction as it leads into a great chorus on the album that will have you singing along. And the song ends with Volz doing a little bit of scat vocalizing here. Very kind of moody type of a song, kind of like this really, really nice soundscape that you get from that song. And that one also went on to become a number 3 Christian radio hit. Then we get Break Out of the Trance. Now, this song was only available as a bonus track on the CD, which is the version I have. Was not available on the vinyl or cassette version. And this one opens up with this type of synthesized keyboard textures that were present on the Petra's Beat the System album. So think about this track, sounds like a track that could fit on the Beat the System album by Petra. It has a really nice guitar riff in it, among the spacey kind of synthesizer flavors that are blended in. And there is this Schools Out scream that's performed on here by the Volz 4 and Friends. That's what they're credited for. And the music kind of matches the lyrics by obtaining this kind of trance-like feeling throughout it. Then it goes on to Hold On to the Fire. Now, for me, this is the band's or the album's highlight. This is the track that I think is the strongest track on the album. Really great song. It's a pop rocker, has this incredible melody, catchy chorus, and it's bolstered by one of the other guest artists on here, by none other than the guitar maestro himself, Phil Keaggy. Offers an explosive guitar solo on here. Background vocals on this, also 2 huge names on here. Grand Funk Railroad's Mark Farner does background vocals on here, and Second Chapter of Acts Matthew Ward also does background vocals on here. So this is a song that proclaims to the listener to hold on to the fire, to the truth that lights your desire. Let it burn, burn, burn deep in your soul. And it's just a fantastic song. Like I said, for me, the best song of the album, the highlight of the album. Also written by Mike Schmidt here. Keaggy also does some guitar soloing toward the end of the song. And this is a song that made it to number 5 in the Christian radio charts. So really great song. And there's a part in the background vocals where you hear Mark Farner distinctly singing one of the background lines. I think he says, "To the fire," and that's Mark Farner in there when you hear that. Really great song. And then the album ends with this beautiful ballad called "Man Like You." It's a beautiful ballad. Volz singing with a lot of emotion, passion oozing out of him as he desires in the song's lyrics to be a man of Christ. It's a majestic and powerful way to end a great album. The song ended up being a number 9 Christian radio hit in 1986. Really, really good. And I think if you look on Discogs, there was a 12-inch vinyl release of this song, Man Like You, backed with Hold On to the Fire. So a little bit of collectible out there that's available on Discogs there. So now Greg would go on after this album to record his second solo album, Come Out Fighting, that was also released on Myrrh Records, and that featured, if you've never heard it, he does a version of Aerosmith's Dream On. That's very well done on there. And Volz has got the vocal chops to pull it off. It's a really good version of that. After that, he released several solo albums. He left Myrrh record label and he released several other solo albums that came up until 2009's God Only Knows. That's being the latest one solo album wise. So he's got a number of them that are released. But the major labor ones were done, the first two were done on Myrrh, and those were probably his two big major label ones. I think the third album that came out was a album that was released on Myrrh Records, I believe, and then after that he had a fourth album called The Exodus, and a bunch of other albums that came, like I said, after that. But you can look on Discogs and you can see he's got quite a number of different solo albums. And then, of course, being involved also with the CPR, the classic Petra Resurrection as well. So, and Greg X Volz did come back to Petra for the Petra Farewell live concert. So that album does feature Greg X Volz along with John Schlitt on there, because that was kind of their farewell album, obviously called Farewell, but also a live album. So that's my look at Greg X Volz, The River's Rising, which I think is a fantastic album, really strong. Would love, like I said, to see it reissued, because I believe it's out of print, probably for sale on eBay. You can get copies of it. I don't know if it was ever released on a jewel case. I never checked, but I know that was the original release that I got on the digipacks, because the digipacks are popular, and they're kind of coming back in popularity again. You're seeing them a lot more again, because I guess with the vinyl resurgence, you kind of get the feel of a vinyl with your digipacks, like I said, personally, I prefer jewel cases, especially if I go to look out for used CD someplace. I may find a great CD, but the jewel case is cracked, no problem. I always have a stash of spare. I actually buy a box of 200 jewel cases that I have for those kind of situations when I buy something used or something arrives in the mail cracked. I can replace it. Something happens with the digipack, the spindle where the CD holds breaks, cover gets scratched up like mine has. Can't replace it. Like if you notice here, it's not too noticeable here, but you can see right across this picture, there's a scratch here. Like I said, using my digipacks, I take very good care of it. This is one I've had for decades now, and it's traveled with me in boxes, as it's come with me here. But really great album. If you've not heard this, I'm sure very easily to stream to hear it. But very first debut solo album from Greg X Volz, primarily known for his work with Petra. So I hope you enjoyed that. And again, I'd love to hear you comment on the album and see what you think about this album. And maybe if you followed Greg X Volz's career in his solo career, you can give some thoughts about what you think about that as well. So hope you enjoyed that and enjoyed spending time with you. And as always, I would like to encourage you to follow the light that shines out of the darkness. God bless everyone.